Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. That was a sort of brief summary of some of the highlights of my career. Career, that's a funny word, isn't it? Career, it's a place. It's also a progression through a series of jobs. And it also means to veer dangerously out of control. And that's sort of what my career has been like. I come from Great Britain, and the people who've kindly invited me to come here have put me up in a great hotel which has a view of the Melbourne cricket ground and this sporting complex. It's fantastic because I just look out of the window and I just think, oh, that's where we lose. So when Zoran came to pick me up and take me here to speak, I wasn't quite clear where he was, and he said, over there, the Rod Laver Arena. I thought, oh, great. We got to a certain point, he said, we're going to now walk down, I think it's called the Hall of Fame or something like that, past winners of the Australian Open. And then he paused and he said, I don't think there are any English people. I said, no, Zoran, for that to be true, the Hall of Fame would have to reach back to Federation Square. It would have to be a mile long. So Great Britain, that's a funny word, isn't it? How many other countries have an adjective in front of them? I mean, countries do have adjectives in front of them on advertising slogans like Incredible India, but very few countries, as far as I can remember, well, New Zealand, I suppose, but I mean, very few countries have adjectives in front of them to reinforce what they are. Awesome Australia or beautiful Belgium. Well, as Kate hinted, actually it could be broke Britain at the moment because sort of what is it like watching the news in Britain at the moment? It's, well, you get a kind of little bit of this thing called the Leveson Inquiry, which is a daily diet of text messages sent between extremely powerful people. Then there's something about the rain, because it's been raining for sort of 6 weeks and floods. And then you've got a discussion about whether Greece is Spain or Spain is Italy, or whether Italy is really Spain, and whether we're all broke, and kind of how we on earth managed to kind of lend one another so much money that we didn't have. I mean, where was it coming from, and where's it all gone to? And so it is nice to be in a place which is doing quite so well, and winning so many horse races and that kind of thing. That hasn't made, you know, I call my wife and I say, did you notice that Australian horse won that race? And she said, what? But there is one great advantage of coming from England, and it was identified by the German poet Heinrich Rilke, who, when asked where he wanted to die, said he'd like to die in England, because everything there happens a century later. So quite why you've invited me to come and speak about sort of the latest ideas in this field, I don't know. But what I want to do is just give you some examples of stuff either that I've been involved in or that I've seen around the world of people trying to tackle the kinds of issues that you're trying to tackle. And as both Kate and others have suggested, David, this is a global issue, and it's a global issue. All around the world, people are trying to tackle this kind of problem. Why is that true? Well, because all around the world, people want education. They want learning. Education and learning have become like a sort of global religion. So all around the world, people want it, and all around the world, education systems are deeply dysfunctional. And they're deeply dysfunctional on a number of levels, but one of them is that they pull and push people into them who are often ill-suited to them, or the system is ill-suited to them and they're ill-prepared. And as a result, although now engagement in education around the world is rising, numbers are rising going into schools, more and more children are sat in boring, dull, irrelevant, pointless, kind of confusing lessons. And as a result, dropout rates are rising, repetition rates are rising, failure rates are rising. And often it seems like the whole discourse about education, which is education is hope, the future, it's about developing talent and all the rest of it, is really as much a language of sorting, failing, and kind of disappointment. And so all around the world you see those issues, particularly amongst particular groups of people. Inner city, industrial cities in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe and the US, ethnic minority groups, indigenous populations, recent immigrants, people who have no traditional history of education of a formal kind in their kind of family background. So all over the world, literally all over the world, millions and millions of parents are for the first time becoming parents of children at school. This is a huge kind of step change. You know, you can go to Turkey. I went to Turkey last year and looked at a great program for mothers to become first educators of children. None of the women involved in this program had been at school past the age of 12, and they had children who were entering school for the first time and were expecting to go on being at school to the age of 18. So these enormous transformations of entitling people to education is coming up against and interacting with cultures which are very diverse and different. And these standardized systems are very poor at learning how to adapt to very different environments. And if we're going to succeed, that's what we need to do. So basically, I think the story of innovation in education is this, really, that so much of what we've done over the past half a century and more has been about more education, more schools, more lessons, longer time, starting earlier, finishing later, getting more people in. And really what we need to focus on now is not more, but better and different. And the only way we'll get better is by doing it differently. If we carry on trying to do more of what we've been doing and push harder and refine, we make some improvements. But basically, the biggest gains in all education systems now in the developed world will not come from more, they'll come from different. And they'll come from different because in order to close the achievement and attainment gaps that open up as income falls, you have to do it differently. You have to find new ways of engaging young people in education, new ways of motivating and inspiring, new ways of teaching and learning. So that's the basic agenda, not more but better and different, and opening up how to do things in a different kind of way. So I'm just going to talk about some examples that I've seen around the world and some of the lessons that come out of them. So this is one of the most inspiring. This is a scheme called Pathways to Education. It started in Toronto in a housing estate called Regent's Park. Regent's Park was built in 1948. It was the biggest public housing scheme in Canada. It was a model of its kind. It was called Regent's Park. By the 1970s, Regent's Park had fallen into deep decay, and by the 1980s and 90s, it was basically run by drug gangs, and it was a kind of absolute kind of war zone. 1 year, 13 people were killed within an area a little larger than a block in drug shootings. And so a woman, amazing woman called Carolyn Acker, was working not on an education project, but on a health project. And she was making absolutely no progress in improving the health of the community. And she thought, what is it that would really improve people's health here? And she spent quite a lot of time talking to people, and she decided actually the best route to improve people's health was for them to get better incomes. And the best route for that, to get jobs, was to get better education. So starting a health project, she turned it into an education project. She spent about 2 years with a partner talking to families, parents, young people, and critically to a small group of young people who had succeeded at school whilst living on Regent's Park. At that stage, 8 in 100 children from Regent's Park would make it out of secondary school. 92 out of 100 wouldn't make it to the end of secondary school. The dropout rates were absolutely enormous. And so she talked to members of that 8% and asked them what they had done that meant that they could succeed. And the key thing that they all said was that they had someone significant in their lives who was a mentor who wasn't from Regent's Park, who gave them access to a world beyond the boundaries of that estate. So this is Pathways to Education. Now, this is the sort of graduation session that I went to look at and write about as part of a book that I was writing called Innovation in Education. And a large proportion of the population, Regent's Park is where new immigrants to Canada arrive. It's a hugely multicultural, multi-ethnic society. It's where, and often the parents of these children won't speak English. They'll have at least 2 jobs. They'll be working the whole time. Their interaction with the school system will be a distant and unfamiliar and often completely perplexing thing. And so I met people, this is Tariq, he was one of the first graduates of this scheme, Pathways to Education. As he freely admits, if Pathways to Education hadn't happened, he would have been a member of a drug gang. That is, in this setting, was at least the surest route to money, status, girls, and a kind of glamorous life. And so when we think about education, we often think that education systems don't really compete. There aren't really competitors. I mean, we've got this state education system and there are a few private schools and all the rest of it, but there isn't a lot of competition in education. Well, actually, in their lives, there's enormous competition because for people on that estate, boys especially, the competition is school or gangs. That's the competition. And if one gives you girls money, fine clothes, fast cars and status, and the other gives you boring exams and kind of not very much at the end of it, which are you going to choose? So this woman on the left there, the right, as you look at it, is Carolyn Acker. And Carolyn devised this program with her partner Norman through this extensive process of talking and listening to families and young people, working out what they wanted. It took them 2 years to devise it. And this is the program. At the age of 13, 14, you're invited to sign up for it. Each year you're on the program, and it's a 4-year program. $1,000 is put into a trust fund, which you can draw down when you go to college to pay your down payment on college tuition. Each term you're on the program, at the start of each term, you get a free bus pass, which you can use at any time. So to go to secondary school in Toronto, you have to travel by bus. It's a significant expense for poor families. You have to complete your grades and pass through every term on your core subjects. You have to come to a homework club at least twice a week. You're given a parent-pupil support worker, which is really more a pupil support worker, not a social worker, but a trained youth worker. Often they recruit people not on the basis of credentials, so much on capability and attitude, and then train them. The student-parent support worker is more like a surrogate parent, really, in a way, for many of these children, and provides an interface to the system, represents them to the system, so that makes sure that if they get in trouble, they don't kind of crash out. And then the system, as well as providing these material incentives, what's really important is you talk to the children who've gone through it. What becomes really critical is the peer-to-peer norms. As they go through it, they start thinking it's about the bus pass and it's about getting better grades. And as they go through it, the project develops its own momentum, and it's really the collective, it's the sort of group going through it that work with one another. And so it's what you see in things like this. They've done it together. They're a kind of little supportive cohort. And most of the motivation is kind of peer-to-peer. It's about them doing it together. Now, on Regent's Park, 1,000 eligible children, 986 are on Pathways to Education. The graduation rate is 85%. This program it's not cheap, but it's not ultra expensive. Compared to the costs of a child in care or a child with a permanent social worker, all the multiple social and other costs involved in failure that come out of these sorts of places, this is absolutely nothing. It's simple, it's structured, it's straightforward, it's direct. So this is another example. This is, and this isn't, this is quite controversial, this example. I mean, it divides people, this example, which is why I think it's quite good. This is a school system in America, a set of charter schools called Cristo Rey. And Cristo Rey was set up by a group of Jesuits. And they had been doing, the main people involved in this had been doing lots of work in South America and Peru. And they had set up a center to provide education for children who worked on the street. So their initial starting point came from the developing world, and they were interested in trying to provide education for children who were working on the street, and so the education had to fit in around how they worked. They came back to Boston and they found that the real problem was, in a way, how to provide work for children in education, or how to think about it in a slightly different way. That many of the children that they wanted to work with in inner city areas had no prospect of employment at the end of education experiences, which were often deeply disappointing and full of failure. And so they reversed the challenge. Rather than fitting education around the lives of working children, how could you fit work around the lives of children in school? And in particular, how could you get really high-quality schools into desperately poor inner-city areas where teachers didn't want to go, there was very little employment, and everything looked desperately bleak? And the solution that they came up with, which took them a while to devise, it was the product of enormous lot of collaboration, different people. It took them at least 5 years to then prove it and make it work. The solution is basically this, that the Cristo Rey School is an employment agency. And the way that the children pay for the education is to go out to work. So this is a school built on a radically different model. The children employ the teachers, because the children go out to work at accredited firms, they earn a real wage, and with that wage they then employ, in effect, the teachers. And the point of a Cristo Rey education is at the end of it you will come out with qualifications which will allow you to go to college, but you'll also come out with a CV on which you will have done at least 3 jobs. And I don't mean work experience, I mean real jobs, jobs that earn them money. And so this is, the whole model is based on extended hours of learning, but in shorter numbers of weeks. So they spend a week learning and a week working, or they break the curriculum up and the week up so that you can mix work and learning. But somehow they make the learning, the education bit, more effective so they can do more with the other bits of time where people go out to work. As I said, it's not to everyone's taste because it is religious. There is a real element of faith in it. There is a strong kind of religious tone, and many people criticize it for being a sort of work-based scheme where children go out to work and they think that that's wrong. Many of the children say that they learn as much at work as they do in school, and the skills that they learn of turning up, working together, learning how to solve problems, all the skills of work are absolutely essential to them. It's a controversial model. My point is simply that if we want to tackle some of these problems, the same old thinking, the same old models won't work. We need to do better and different. And doing different is controversial. I've met a lot of innovators. I do a lot of work with innovators, all sorts of people in the private sector, public sector, social entrepreneurs. My basic kind of thought about people who are innovators is if you want to innovate, you have to be prepared for at least half of the people you meet to think you're bonkers, or not just bonkers, but actually wrong. some people are going to think you're wrong. And if you stand up and everyone in the room thinks you're great and what you're doing is obviously brilliant, you're probably not innovating. Because in a way, some people have got to think what you're doing is bonkers. And the trouble with innovators is some of them are bonkers. And the trick is to spot the people who are bonkers but creative from the people who are simply bonkers. But the other thing is that often innovation, which is challenging like this, challenges convention, so it's controversial. It really kind of provokes people because it challenges assumptions. And I think if you're going to innovate, you need to be prepared for that. So this is some of the pupils at Cristo Rey at their passing out parade. What are some of the lessons then that I have learned from those things that I've looked at, those projects and other projects that I've been involved in? Well, these are just some of the questions I think you'd have to ask. The first is, how well do we understand the young people involved? One of the amazing things about public policy and people making public policy is if you went through the government of Victoria, you'd probably go from department to department and have a completely different view of young people. That some see them as kind of potential drug addicts, others as kind of a potential social nuisance, others as potential geniuses. I mean, our view of what young people are is often conditioned by the kind of policy environments that we work in. And the key thing about these schemes is that they start by understanding young people in their own terms. They take the time to bother, to look, to listen, to have conversations. Caroline Acker took 2 years to develop that scheme. She didn't do it like that. She took 2 years of patiently listening to work out. Cristo Rey took 5 years to bottom out its model. So one of the first things is to think about research, use ethnography, which means just sitting and listening to people. And actually, more and more people are using this as approaches to developing new products for young people in general. So the makers of the Osbournes, that reality TV program, they came up with the Osbournes not by looking at the youth demographic and doing lots of quantitative research. They put researchers in the bedrooms of 6 teenagers for 6 weeks, and at the end of it came up with a specification that teenagers wanted to watch a program about a dysfunctional family because most of them felt their families were dysfunctional. And if it had a sort of element of celebrity, all the better. And that's how they came up with the Osbournes. So often innovation comes from looking in depth at particular lives. It also comes in all of these programs from a sort of conversational approach where the service or the solution is built on a constant conversation, a constant feedback of to and fro about how people are, where they're at, what they want, what's going on in the rest of their lives. And so creating that continual setting, not just doing it right at the beginning, but a continual setting in which young people can talk about themselves. And importantly, talk about themselves. Because the most important thing is to work out what young people want to achieve with their lives and then work out how services might be able to help them. Often what we do in public services is try and work out how our services can improve their lives. In other words, our interest is primarily in our service and what it can do to their lives, whereas it should be the other way around. It should be about their lives and what our service might offer to them, and to organise the service around that. So this is just one example of the lengths that you have to go to. This is a project that our design firm Participle did in Swindon, a town in the UK just outside London, where we've been working with 12 families to develop a new program of family support called Life. And this is what we did with one of those families. We spent 3 weeks putting together a timeline of this entire family's interaction with public services. It would almost have covered, half the wall along there. It took us 3 weeks to put it together because all the information is available, but no one had brought it together. And what it reveals is that this family was constantly in and out of public services, different public services, and not one of them did anything to change that family's life. They just processed them in, out, from one service to another. None of it joined up. And that the direct cost, just the direct cost of these services was worth about £250,000 a year over 16 years. That's a lot of money. I mean, imagine if you were just able to invest a bit of that up front to solve the problem rather than process it. But to do that, it would require you getting to know the detail of their lives. So the second thing is another P. It's what's the product? What is it that you're trying to produce? What outcome is it? And there, I think, the key thing is, as I said, to work out whether the product is the thing that the system wants to produce, and it's narrow, attainment, success rate, exams, qualification, job, or whether it's broader, whether it's about well-being, capability, confidence. And if it's broader, then it opens up many more opportunities, I think, for innovation and seeing how things fit together in new ways. But the most successful, I think, open this question up, and they make the product, the outcome, partly something that young people define, that they, as a result, feel bought into. The next thing is, if you have understood and have a process of understanding what young people want and engaging them in a sense of what the outcomes are that they seek, well, then what is the process for achieving that, and what does that look like? And here, I just draw one really crude distinction, that things that work do things with and allow young people to do things by themselves, and things that don't work generally do things to young people in the name of doing things for them. And this distinction between whether you're doing for and to or with and by, I think goes to the heart of the design of effective programs. Because most of our experience of large systems, public and private, is that they say they want to do something for you, and they do, but often they end up doing something to you. So I have a personal relationship banker at Barclays Bank who wants to do something for me, but I have the sneaking suspicion he really wants to do something to me. And obviously, a lot of people's experience of public service is as soon as a social worker walks through the door, they're there to do something for you, but you've got the sneaking suspicion they're going to do something to you. And so services that work for and end up doing to create this very sort of standoff relationship, slightly, possibly even adversarial. The ethic of all these schemes is that they work with people and they do things, they allow young people to do things by themselves. And as a result, they create a stronger sense of independence, commitment, investment, and partnership. And it's that ethic which is critical. They are, they major on motivation. That motivation is the key thing. How do you keep young people wanting to come back? And so it might be extrinsic motivation, like the bus pass or the $1,000 in the trust fund at Pathways, or it might be intrinsic motivation. It's fun, it's interesting, it's good fun, it's with other people. So they are basically, the underlying ethic of these programs is pull, not push. If you're dealing with someone like Tariq has all sorts of other things going on in his life which are going to pull him away. So you have to pull. You have to almost make it something you market or you make attractive or you sell. It's got to have something which has a sort of visceral ingredient to it that really pulls them back to it. You cannot afford for it to be bland or kind of not compelling. And so often these schemes, in my experience, major not on education or learning or the thing that they're really trying to achieve. They go through something else: music, sport, practical work, enjoyment, pleasure. They often have a very strong sense of productivity, that the young people involved are engaged in making something not just sitting and learning. So it's learning as a sort of making, doing experience. And in a funny kind of way, they are what the Jesuits would call structured love. They are a structured process of showing care. And because of the structure, they're not a free-for-all. They set high expectations. They demand things of the young person. They create a kind of framework, a skeleton, a sense of where they are, but it's imbued with a deep sense of care. So this is the LIFE programme in Swindon. We started by looking at 12 of these very chaotic, dysfunctional families, hugely costly, public services doing next to nothing. We literally put designers on the estate with these families, living with them for 3 months, talking to them about their lives. This is an estate. We had one researcher from Latin America who was working with us, and she said the key thing about this estate is that it's just like some of the favelas that I worked in Rio, but there's no religion. And not only is there no religion, there's no jobs, there are precious few there are precious few shops, clubs, and even, only a handful of pubs. In other words, there's no social life on these estates. And the most pressurized families who are coping with multiple pressures and strains in their lives are the most disconnected. So we looked at this and tried to get the people in Swindon to think about not just these families, but the whole sort of ecosystem of families, that not only were there families in chronic crisis, and by that we meant families for whom crisis was a way of life. It wasn't that crisis was a bad thing. Crisis was the way they lived. Because virtually the only thing that brought them together was crisis. These were families often that seemed more likely to get together to go to court than to get together to go out to the park or to go to school. I mean, crisis was what brought them back together as the forces that sort of, rent them asunder were going in the opposite direction. There are lots of families who are just on the brink of that, who won't come to the notice of public authorities, but they're just on the brink, they're just coping. And then there are lots of families who are just sort of surviving and getting by, and then quite a lot that are thriving. But in a sense, you need to think about the whole kind of all those layers of those families together. We tracked the social worker who worked with one of the families, Tanya's family, social worker attached to the 12-year-old son. And we spent a week with the social worker, literally a week, just following them around. And this is what we found. 74% of their time was on administration. 14% was face-to-face with the boy. 12% was collecting information to process during the 74% of time on administration. In other words, 86% of their time was spent servicing the system rather than working directly with the child. So you'd have to reverse that. You'd have to turn that around. To get the authorities in Swindon really bought in to this change, we worked with one of these families, Tanya's family, with a film crew, and we made a short documentary about their lives. We showed them one 2-minute 30 episode of violence in the family, which completely transformed their view. They were so alarmed, shocked, and flabbergasted by what was happening in the family that the moment we showed it to them twice, after that they couldn't go back. After that, they couldn't say what we're doing is okay. They knew they couldn't. It was a kind of turning point. So what we've created is a structured program, but it's all built on the engagement of the families in choosing who they want to work with and choosing how to set goals within this sort of 12-step series of activities where they start with this invitation to bring them in, they start then to build aspirations and then build capabilities and try and work their way through and out of the program. And the aim of this is to get the family working with a small team, maybe 2 people, maybe total cost in a year, maybe 40 to 50,000 pounds as against 250,000 pounds. And the aim is to get them out of public services so that they don't any longer have their lives wrapped up in those kinds of services. This is Escuela Nueva. This is a completely different program, but similar principles that I saw in Colombia. Escuela Nueva is a kind of social software for learning built on the idea that the more that children collaborate in setting learning objectives and self-regulate, if you can create a sort of system of self-regulation in learning, then you can make scarce resources go much further. Started by a remarkable woman called Vicky Colbert, who taught in the poorest schools in rural Colombia. Rural Colombia, a single teacher school, one teacher, probably 60 children, range in age from 5 to 14. Well, if you try and teach in the traditional way to a group that's that big and that diverse, it won't work, or it will produce very dysfunctional and disappointing results. So Vicky created this way of children learning together in groups, so the teacher could create maybe 10 groups and work with the groups, and they would be self-regulating. And so one teacher could then teach a series of groups, and the groups would be the focus of the learning. She then took that into inner city areas with these Escuela Nueva learning circles. And this is where I met these guys as part of that project. They spent most of their life working on the street from the age of about 6. At the age of 8, they were heavy users of various kinds of drugs, and they were heading absolutely nowhere. And they were lucky enough to meet this woman, Louise Dari, who ran this learning circle. And when she started it, they said to her, do we have to... She found them in a park and invited them to this learning circle. They said, we haven't got any books, we haven't got any clean clothes, can we still come to it? And she said, absolutely, you can come to it. It's completely open. And she just started by getting them to talk. And she sort of created, as I said, this sort of structured environment of care in which the young people were held and which they became participants in their own learning. And so, very like, in a way, the LIFE program, this is where they live, in this absolutely blasted favela on the edge of Bogota. Much the same kind of principle, with and by, not for and to. So who are the people who make these things work? They often are skilled, they're thoughtful, but they don't necessarily have specialist skills. They're not necessarily professionals. When we asked families on the LIFE program who they wanted to work with, social workers were not top of the list. Actually, it was people like them that they wanted to work with, or people that they could respond to and respect. So often it's about creating teams, and as I said, I think the key skill for a lot of these people is how they connect with people to create a sense of kind of momentum and motivation. So thinking about who the people are might be another bit of what needs to change. And where are the places where it happens? Of course, in education systems, we have all sorts of special places, pupil referral units, special schools, special programs. I think the most interesting projects are trying to find places which allow for new kinds of learning experiences and new ways of children doing productive work out in the community. So how could you mobilize all the assets of a community to help young people learn, not just put them in special places like pupil referral units? So this is a system that we tried to create in South London called Loops. Basically, youth services in the place where we were working, Croydon in South London, they reached less than 5% of the young people in Croydon. So our aim was, how could you create a youth service using the same amount of money, and instead of running 3 youth centres, how could you mobilise employers and other people in all of Croydon to provide a series of experiences which could cater for over 50% of young people in Croydon, and particularly the 50% who are the least motivated or the least able or the least engaged. And so we came up with this system called loops of people offering experiences of work or other kinds of activities, of young people being able to think about and choose them, have the experiences, and also have a sort of mentor and reflector character who would help them reflect on the experiences and then go on and have 2 or 3 more. So no buildings, no infrastructure, just using what's available in the community. I've seen another project very like this in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, called Aprendiz, which is, they call it a social technology. And it's a social technology for communities assessing what resources they have in communities that could help young people, which are outside public resources. So in those communities in Brazil, the public resources are all in schools. The schools are often very dysfunctional and high dropout rates. And so how could a community work out what it's got available around it that could improve educational outcomes? And that was our idea of how it might scale in this much more cellular kind of way across Croydon, rather than being a kind of big infrastructure, high capital cost, bring young people into our institutions. Instead, could you take solutions out to them where they are and connect them to things going on in their communities? Another example comes from Amsterdam. It's called the Weekend School. This was created by a psychologist called Helen Terwin. And she basically just took the idea of a church Sunday school and created a non-religious version of it. And what she was interested in was children from inner city ethnic minority backgrounds who often turn away from education, particularly boys, at the age of about 13 or 14. And what she was interested in was whether you could create systematically experiences for them that would connect them to work and opportunity and give them added motivation to carry on at school. So she created a scheme with local employers so that local employers volunteer each weekend for 8 weeks on an 8-week program to provide structured work and learning experiences at a weekend for young people, employing the staff with the help of teachers to create these structured activities which give young people access to experiences outside where they live. And so this was a communications agency that we went to look at that was in effect running a school for a weekend for a group of about 20 children from an inner city housing estate. And finally, who pays? You can't change the product, change who works, change where it happens, change the process, really, unless you change who pays, it seems to me, how the money flows. And so 2 of the experiments that we've been looking at have been the use of individual budgets, so giving budgets to young people so that they can commission, with the help of a broker or an advisor, solutions. And in Islington, in North London, where I live, a project that I'm chairing, which is to create a youth board so that young people in Islington elect a youth council who take over the youth services budget. And with other people, with adults and other people appointed to the board, the young people set the priorities and commission the services. And it's the youth board that does that. And so we've been holding a series of workshops with young people and others to discuss those themes. And after a period of ethnography, we worked out that these were many of the key things that young people wanted, that they lived often in small worlds. They wanted to have access to a larger world. They wanted key relationships that were meaningful. They wanted the opportunity to just be kids, to just have fun, to just be able to kind of really enjoy themselves. And so we're designing a project where the entire budget of that council for youth services will be given over to a board of young people to commission. So these are, I think, the key themes of what you need to think about. Do you know the people? Have you really bothered to find out? What is the product that you're trying to produce? What's the process? Is it a 4 and 2 process or a with and by process? Who are the people who are involved in making it happen? Where does it happen? What are the right places for it? And who pays? And if you bring it together, this is what I kind of think I've seen in all of these projects. It's a sort of combination of these two ingredients. They're both systematic, they do things in a structured way, they have ways of really thinking about what they're doing and how it unfolds, and yet they're deeply empathetic. They build strong relationships both between staff and young people, but also amongst young people themselves. So there's something about them being very systematic and caring about what they do. They care about data. They really worry about what's working. They want to have a method, but they're also deeply relational, and they respond to people and how they're different. And so if you think about this grid, this just says that there are kind of these different ways of thinking about it. There might be high system and low system, low empathy and high empathy. So if you're up in that high system, low empathy box, that's like travelling on Ryanair or a really bad low-cost airline, where it's all system and there's absolutely no empathy. And if you're in this sort of bottom right-hand box, that's like going to a farmer's market, where there's lots of empathy and sort of food with mud on it, but not much system. And where you don't want to be is low empathy, low system, because that's sort of complete chaos. And so actually most of the families that we were working with in Swindon, they were often in this sort of box. It was that there wasn't much empathy in their lives. People didn't feel often that they could trust one another, and there was very little by way of system. Or if the system came in, it just made life even more chaotic. One answer to that is to go up there, and if you've read Amy Chua's book, The Tiger Mother, or there's a new French book called Bringing Up Baby, these are parenting as system. It's kind of like parenting as a project. Amy Chua in her book talks about declaring war on her children. It's a kind of battle for control, and it's sort of parenting as project. I'm basically down here, which is sort of, high empathy attachment theory, where I can't really be bothered quite a lot of the time, but I do like kind of feeling nice and kind of making people feel warm. The sort of one kind of caricature of attachment theory is that it's all about empathy, it's all about esteem. And actually, much of our lives we spend, I think, bibbing and bobbing between things that are up here, high system, and then a little bit of empathy. And then we go back to high system, and then we give people a little bit of empathy. Empathy is like the sort of dessert, and this is sort of greens. And we kind of create little spaces of empathy for people in otherwise rather sort of inclement and sort of unattractive systems. And the things that I looked at that really work, these high-impact social innovations, they're up there. They are both highly systematic and highly empathetic. They have structures and ways of doing things and methods, and they track people, and they've got data, and they really think through what they're doing, and yet they're highly, highly relational, and they're full of incredibly important kind of emotional content, which is about people transforming their sense of themselves in relation to other people. And so, as I said, in a way, it is like structured love. It is a kind of feeling of care, attention, respect, but within a structure, which is demanding, aspirational, sets high expectations, pushes you on, gives you a sense of real progress. And it's that combination somehow that we've got to get. And we won't get that by doing more of what we've got. We won't get that by spending more money on it. Money might be important. We'll get that by doing things in a different way to get better outcomes. And what we need is not just more, we need better and different. And that's the key to the future for these children. Thank you.
My name is Andy. You said at the start that education should be not made longer, made better and different. Would you say it'd be like an education revolution or just a modification?
I think personally that education is fit for a revolution, basically. and that most of the models that we've got, we've inherited from the 19th century in their roots, and they were systematized in the 20th century. And you can do more by improving those. But now I think the dysfunction of those systems, the number of people they fail, the demands of a different kind of economy and a different way of working mean that basically, and the opportunities we have now for doing things in a different way, means that if this were basically any other industry other than a rather regulated, over-inspected, state-controlled industry, if it were any other industry, it would be breaking loose. I mean, there'd be all sorts of experimentation going on. So there are good reasons why public funding and public regulation is involved in education, but somehow we have to open it up, because otherwise we'll be left with a system which sort of teaches in a sort of factory-like way. It's a sort of schools, especially secondary schools, are a sort of bizarre mixture of kind of factory, monastery and prison, for a world in which children have opportunities to learn which are absolutely multiple. And this disconnect is going to get more and more pressing. So I think we need better and different, really, in all sorts of ways. Otherwise, we'll lose people, basically. We'll produce much more failure than we should.
Thank you. Julie Edwards from Jesuit Social Services. And I was interested, I visited Christo Rey last year. I think one of the challenges, and maybe it's when you say who pays, is you talked about the deep conversation and the relational aspect about learning about what are the needs. That takes time, and as you talked about the Christo Rey experiment, that took 5 years. Again, you come to the last point, who pays? This is a difficulty we have. We've just begun Jesuit Community College over the last year or so. You get 2 years or 2 years funding. But the reality is it's going to take us a while to really, really crack it. So in terms of innovation, etc., where do you think your own work, perhaps you could shed some light on the funding for that, but how are we going to break open those funding streams to really let us have a go at trying new things?
Well, you need systems to provide at least some money, perhaps through shared pots, for innovation. So there does need to be something of that. I think some ideas are going to come from the outside. I think there are going to be more things which develop outside these systems in social enterprises as well, so there'll be different sorts of models that will become possible. It does need, if you're going to innovate, it does need some dedicated resources. Importantly, it does need time, and it needs a degree of space as well. So you're absolutely right that we need things to do that. Many of the things that I looked at, those innovations, started with foundations, actually, providing outside investment, providing a limited amount of space in which to get started, and then them sort of reconnecting with the system. So one of the biggest things, I think, in the future is that if there's going to be more innovation coming from outside systems, how does it reconnect with those systems, and how do you create some sort of coming together? But this ability to do this, it becomes, I think, is becoming absolutely critical and strategic for education systems.
Hi, thanks very much, Charles. That was fantastic. I was a bit surprised by your title using the phrase young people at risk. It seemed you talked a lot more about services and systems at risk. And I wonder what you think about the way we talk about young people. In the introduction today, we talked about a minority of vulnerable young people. What is the significance of the kind of phrases that we use to describe the young people we work with?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right to pick that up. I mean, basically, all the things that we work with, basically the young people want to be seen, A, as normal, because they are normal, and B, as capable. And so really all these projects are built on the idea of capability, that there is capability, it just hasn't been brought out yet or found, or doesn't have the confidence. And so the fundamental starting point is to assume ambition and capability, and that the conditions for that to be brought out haven't yet been got right, but it's fundamentally there. And I think that that is the fundamental starting point. So just to give you an example, I'm chair of a project called Apps for Good. Apps for Good started in the UK as an outgrowth of a project that I'd looked at in Brazil to take computers into favelas in Brazil. And when we brought it to the UK, we looked around for a bit and talked to a lot of people, young people, and decided that actually computers weren't very exciting, but smartphones were. And so we decided to create a program for young people to learn how to program apps on smartphones. And the point of this program, it's an 8-week program, and the idea is to engage groups of young people in coming up with an idea for an app, researching a market. It has to have some sort of social or community purpose. They then work with designers and tech people to design a prototype for an app, and then they go into a sort of like a Dragon's Den kind of competition with lots of other people, and the best app gets some more money to go through. But the point is not to produce apps. The point is to produce young people who've been through a process which is creative and entrepreneurial, and which they gain confidence and capability. And when we talked to them about how we described the program, we did start off by talking about vulnerable young people. And basically they said, we're not vulnerable, we're just really ambitious and frustrated. And so that's now the language, absolutely the language we use. You must assume ambition and capability. And when we did that work with those families in Swindon, their lives are chaotic because they've got all sorts of pressures and not many resources, but their aspirations are no different from any other family, really, fundamentally. So building on capability is, I think, the starting point.
Yeah, g'day, mate. How are you?
Hiya.
My name's Bertie Newry and I'm the Children Child Safety Commissioner. I was just really struck by the fact that the examples that you used were all working within communities, and I thought you might say something about the value of working in the context of communities.
Yeah, so I think, basically the design principle for a lot of these schemes is don't try and get young people into our institutions and create sort of special institutions and perhaps open those up or make them more attractive or give them a new coat of paint or what have you, but take elements of the solution out to where they are, and importantly then connect them to other things in their communities, work, resources, people, which can sustain them when the service is gone. So if you've got a service model which is all about in, out, then when the service goes, the support goes. But if you can connect them, this is why in the Pathways to Education work, the student parent support worker is critical, but the mentors were even more critical in a way. It was the fact that they had mentors who were lawyers, doctors, professionals, accountants, you name it, anything they wanted outside the community that meant they went away from where they were and saw something different and then came back, which became very important. So I think that that should be a basic design principle, that we should think, let's do it out there and take the services and the people to solutions that work out there rather than bringing the people into where we are, which is in here.